Good afternoon and welcome to the Holmes-Hunter Lecture series. On behalf of the Office of the President, I would like to say thank you for joining us for this extraordinary lecture. Each year, the University of Georgia celebrates the legacy of Dr. Hamilton Holmes and Ms. Charlene Hunter-Gault, the first two African-American students to enroll at our state's flagship institution. This lecture has consistently provided a platform to explore issues of race, race relations, justice, and civil rights. And most importantly, and at its core, the lecture has provided an opportunity to celebrate education and to engage the next generation of college students. On behalf of the Office of the President, many of whom are with us today, I would like to reiterate my thanks to each of you for joining us this afternoon. I would now like to introduce the 22nd President of the University of Georgia, President Jerry W. Moorhead. To enroll at our state's flagship institution.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 2021 Holmes-Hunter Lecture. This annual lecture serves as an important opportunity for our community to honor two of the university's most iconic individuals, the late Dr. Hamilton Holmes Jr. and Ms. Charlene Hunter-Gault. Dr. Hamilton Holmes graduated from the University of Georgia cum laude with a Bachelor of Science degree in 1963. He later became the first African-American student to be admitted to the Emory University School of Medicine, where he graduated in 1967. After receiving his medical degree, Hamilton spent his career in the medical field, where he became the medical director and the head of orthopedic surgery at Grady Memorial Hospital. We lost Hamilton far too quickly, but his legacy lives on through his wonderful family and the lives that he touched. Charlene Hunter-Gault also graduated in 1963 and later became an acclaimed journalist and worked at CNN for several years, where she served as the network's bureau chief and correspondent in Johannesburg, South Africa. Throughout her incredible career, Charlene has received numerous national and international awards, including 2 National News and Documentary Emmy Awards, as well as 2 Peabody Awards. Charlene and her husband have established an endowment here at the University of Georgia to inspire and support students in projects that give voice to the voiceless. Since Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes first stepped through the arch, a great deal has changed for the better. Our academic building now proudly bears the Holmes-Hunter name. Diversity and inclusion are now core values of this institution, and we continue to work to build a more welcoming and inclusive environment at the University of Georgia. This year, we commemorate the 60th anniversary of the courageous steps that Charlene and Hamilton took, opening doors that allowed many to follow in their footsteps. It is our goal to cultivate a vibrant exchange of ideas at the University of Georgia by bringing speakers who challenge us to think critically about pressing questions of the day. I have no doubt that our esteemed speaker and interviewer today, Henry Louis Gates, will do just that. We welcome Professor Gates virtually to the University of Georgia. But before we hear from Professor Gates, I want to call on our student speaker, Jamani Smith. Jamani is a senior mechanical engineering major and serves as president of the Zeta Pi chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Jamani, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, President Moorhead. Good evening, everyone. Henry Louis Gates Jr. is the Alphonse Fletcher University Professor and Director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University, an award-winning filmmaker, literary scholar, journalist, cultural critic, and institution builder. He has authored or co-authored 25 books and created 23 documentary films. Finding Your Roots, his groundbreaking genealogy series on PBS, has educated millions of Americans about the histories and cultures of our nation and the world. His documentary series, The African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross, earned a Peabody Award, Emmy Award, and other national honors. His newest project comprises a film series titled The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song, and a companion book featuring UGA alumna Charlayne Hunter-Gault. Having written for such leading publications as The New Yorker, The New York Times, and Time, Professor Gates serves as chair of TheRoot.com, a daily online magazine he co-founded, and chair of the creative board of Fusion TV. He oversees the Oxford African American Studies Center, the first comprehensive scholarly online resource in the field. Among his numerous prizes, he was an inaugural recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Genius Grants and the first African American scholar to be awarded the National Humanities Medal. He earned his BA in history from Yale University in 1973 and his MA and PhD in English literature from Clare College at the University of Cambridge in 1979. Joining Professor Gates for today's lecture is Charlayne Hunter-Gault, who bravely enrolled in the University of Georgia in 1961 as one of the first two African American students to integrate UGA. Not only is she a namesake of this lecture, but she has also given the lecture herself in 2018. Ms. Hunter-Gault and Professor Gates, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you so much, Jamani, for that marvelous introduction. Thank you, President Moorhead, for your marvelous introduction as well. This is a great honor for me. 60 years ago, I actually watched Charlayne entering that building that on that awful day, historic day, with Vernon Jordan. I watched them on our little black and white 12-inch television set in Piedmont, West Virginia, in the Allegheny Mountains on the Potomac River, halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington, where I grew up and where all my families lived for 200 years, literally. I watched that news footage. I was 9 years old, and it never occurred to me that I would ever meet either this young woman who was so bravely being ushered by this tall, brave man through a nightmare of venom and hostility and animosity. And I looked at her and I thought, I couldn't have done that. How could that young woman do that? And I looked at Vernon Jordan and thought, how courageous he is. And the fact that I can now say that one of my very best friends, my church-going buddy in July and August on Martha's Vineyard, and believe me, my daily email correspondent, is that same young woman, Charlayne Hunter. It's a miracle to me. And to be asked to interview Charlayne on this 60th anniversary is one of the greatest honors of my career. Charlayne and I thought that rather than for me to give, I give lectures all the time. You can watch me on online, anytime that you want. I wanted to mark this occasion and honor Charlayne by interviewing her and asking her about that time and about events subsequent to that time. I didn't get to meet Hamilton Holmes, unfortunately. He had passed by the time I became friends with Charlayne, but I followed Charlayne's career, and it was an inspiration to me, both at the New York Times and the New Yorker. And I knew that Charlayne was a person who bombarded the editorial staff and the publisher at the New York Times and made them stop using Negro and start using Black. And she deserves to be in the list of Black first for getting the New York Times to change its usage. That might seem like a small thing to you students today, but it wasn't. It wasn't at all. And Jamani, I want to tell you, there was a time when white racists thought Black people weren't smart enough to study engineering. We couldn't count and calculate. So people of our generation, old school people like Charlayne and me, of course, Charlayne's considered to be younger than I am, I have to say that. She sent me an email right now. I'm reading it saying, be sure to say that. We remember when forms of racism were pernicious at that kind of level. You know, does the Negro mind, is it capacious enough to embrace calculus? You know, all kind of ridiculous claims like that we had to fight. And one of the most important contributions ever made to the civil rights movement was not only Charlene having the bravery to walk through those two columns of racist aspersions being cast upon her, but for her and Hamilton to succeed in class, to do well, to show them that Black people had the requisite intelligence to perform well at an historically white college or university. And both Hamilton and Charlene did that, and did that magnificently. So Charlene, I want to thank you for inspiring me at the age of 9. I still don't know if I'm courageous enough to walk through those columns of racist screaming, but you were. And because of that, everything changed. People remember James Meredith integrating the University of Mississippi, but Charlene and Hamilton Holmes got there first. And that's sometimes forgotten and never should be. And I commend the University of Georgia for naming this lecture series and making it an annual event, and for other things that they have done and will do in honor of Charlene and Hamilton. So Sister Charlene, are you ready to, you're usually the questioner, the interrogator. Are you ready to be interrogated, my sister?
I don't know. I have my computer here. I can send you an email if I don't like the question. But let me say just real quick before you begin your interrogation, I am so honored to be a part of this ongoing Holmes-Hunter Lecture. And I could respond to everyone who's spoken today, but I won't take up the time because I know that there are those who want to ask their questions in addition to you, Professor Gates. But I do want to say that I'd like to dedicate this day to Hamilton Holmes, my ancestor, friend. I miss him tremendously, but on the other hand, he's with me every day. He's never far away from me because, like you have demonstrated in your series, The Black Church, we learned in our churches about faith. And one of the things we learned about faith is that when you pass on, I learned in South Africa that you never use the term DEAD or DEATH, you say people transitioned. And so Hamilton is with us, even as we sit here today and you cannot see him, but I want him to know that he is never far from me or far from any of us at UGA or anywhere else where people do as you try to help us do, Skip, and that is study our history and benefit from it. So thank you all for doing this today, and I'm ready for your interrogation, I think.
That was beautiful, Charlene. Yeah, I believe that our ancestors are in a kind of, a genealogical purgatory. And each week on our show, we try to find your ancestors and open up the vault where they're suspended and let them tell their stories. And Hamilton is lucky that you're here to tell his story and share his story. And I admire the relationship that you had and that you still have, quite frankly. I admire that very much. Charlene, I've never asked you this. Who were your heroes growing up?
Oh my. You know, I grew up in the segregated South where the rulers of the society, that is, they thought they were the rulers, wanted us to think that we were unequal. And yet the people in my community, long before I ever heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, that segregated village had my heroes in them, not least those who lived in my house. The women, in large part, because my father was often away. He was a military man in two wars, World War II and then Korea. So for the most part, until he came home on his 30-day leaves, it was my mother and my grandmother. And they provided me with all of the lessons that I needed to think of myself not as second class, but when they couldn't give us first class citizenship, they gave us a first class sense of ourselves. And that was true in our neighborhood. It was true in our little segregated schools where we used to get the hand-me-down textbooks with often pages torn from the white schools. But our teachers taught us our history. It was where I first learned about so many wonderful women who you have chronicled in your series, your various series that were mentioned earlier. But, you know, although one of my first inspirations came out of the comic books, Brenda's comic newspapers, Brenda Starr, soon I learned about Ida B. Wells and her courageous effort to ensure that Black people had first-class citizenship in their heads, if not in reality, but she also worked towards making it a reality. So and then on Sundays, I mean, we go to church, and that's where we also were taught that we were first class. And my mom used to send me every summer to my grandparents, my father's parents. My grandfather was a minister. He was a teaching preacher. But my grandmother was the saint. And as 3 days after I entered the University of Georgia, there was a riot outside my dorm. And I was suspended after tear gas dispersed the crowds, albeit late. The police seemed to want them to be there as long as they could be there. And so the next day, there were pictures of me in the car with the dean and others being taken back to Atlanta, 70 some miles away. And the journalist the next day asked me, was I afraid? And I did not even realize why I wasn't afraid. But it went back to that summer, those summers in the church, and that grandmother of mine who was the saint in Florida. And she made me learn Bible verses, which I didn't want to do at 5 and 6 years old. I was a tomgirl. I wanted to climb the mango trees and eat the raw mangoes. She insisted that I learn Bible verses. And one of them, I had no idea that was what was in the back of my head that night. But it was, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It's amazing when you teach your children well, those lessons stay with them throughout their life, which is why what you do with your history series and all that you do every day on television is so important. So we need that history. And I don't mean just we Black people. We people of all colors need that history so that we respect one another for what we've endured and how we persevered and how we have maintained the generosity that we have towards even people who don't do well by us.
No, so beautifully put. I've always thought of the church, starting with Sunday school, as a self-esteem factory, you know, that you could be buked and scorned, as the tradition says, 6 days a week, but on Sunday, you walk in that church, you were king and you were queen. You know, you had white gloves on, even if you had been a maid cleaning toilets all week. You walked in and you read the enrollment list, or you took up the collection, or whatever function you had, and you were somebody. And I think self-esteem starts at home. I mean, and your relationship with your parents, your relationship with your grandmother, and you were very lucky. So what I was seeing on my black and white television, and by the way, you look better in color than even in black and white.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to get you on these shows every day so that you can compliment me instead of criticizing me.
Yeah, it'll be my pleasure. So that noble bearing that I saw had long been in formation and preparation, and it had been planned by other people, older and wiser, with lesson plans that you couldn't understand the reason for, you know, like the memorization of those Bible verses. Right. But tell me about the times you were AME, right?
Yeah, and let me just say one quick thing about church, because when you look at the civil rights movement and Atlanta's civil rights movement with Julian Bond and John Lewis, and all of those were going on at about the same time I was at UGA. Those young people who were demonstrating in the street and getting arrested and going to jail, every day they dressed like they were going to church. They wore gloves, they wore their high heels to march in the street and often get knocked around by the law enforcement and then go to jail, where they put them in jail with murderers. Mm-hmm. But even the women in the prisons who had committed crimes respected them for what they were standing for. Because so many of them may not have committed the crimes had they been first-class citizens, you know, I don't know.
But the way we dressed in public, the way we spoke in public, they were part of our armor. That was part of the war that we were raging against racists. So people couldn't say, look at those Negroes, as we would have said that, and look how bad they dress. Sorry, that's my doorbell. I'm in the kitchen of my house, and life goes on, so yeah, I can't mute the doorbell. But people don't understand that. You know, I'll tell you a funny story. The swimming pool, I went to integrated schools starting with first grade in 1956, and the swimming pool integrated a year later. And it was a town of 2,500 people and only about 300 Black people. And I like to swim. Everybody went to the swimming pool all day. Ain't a lot to do in a paper mill town, 2,500 people in the hills of West Virginia, right? So every day we went swimming. And my mother made me take Avon moisturizing lotion. And Charlene, you know why, but these students don't. And she would say, Skippy, when you get out of the pool, you dry off. I say, yes, mama. And then she'd say, you put this moisturizing cream on so you don't look ashy, because you can't embarrass the race. I say, yes, mama. I don't know, I must have lathered that stuff all over me. But all this, as silly as it sounds today, was quite serious then. It was all part of the apparatus of American apartheid, of Jim Crow white supremacy. And any flaw that we had could be used not only against us personally, but against everybody. Charlene Hunter, I want you students to hear this, was not only representing an individual, not representing her mother and father only, or her grandmother who tortured her with Bible verses, King James Version, no less. She was representing the race. She was representing me and my mom and my dad and my brother, who was an oral surgeon, who all were gathered around that TV, wanting her to succeed. Don't fall down, sister. Do your homework. Don't flunk out. You represent the race. You know, that's how it worked. Part for whole. Part for whole. But was your faith ever tested, Charlene? You know, when you saw that hatred and you said, this ain't in the Bible, you know, I didn't bargain for this. Was your faith tested by what you saw of human society when the girls upstairs would stomp their feet to disturb your sleep or your study time, or refuse to befriend you? Did you ever say, this is too much, I'm out of here, and my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
To be perfectly honest, and I don't remember everything at this age, but I remember all of that. And part of what constituted my support were the people I've already talked about. But I also have to say that, and one of the things, you know, there was a documentary that aired at not long ago at what was the place where they aired the Summer of Soul, and I talked about
Sundance.
And I talked about how I had gone to Wayne State University waiting for the judge to rule on our case, and when I got the news that we had been admitted, my sorors, the deltas there, gave me things to bring home. And one of them was an album by Nina Simone. And so when those students were beating on my ceiling, I was listening to Nina Simone. It didn't bother me. And then there came a time, and this is what I think has helped to form my thinking about our country, especially now in this difficult moment of division and, yes, hatred. There was division and hatred then. But one night, I was the only student on the first floor in a room by myself. And one night, and I couldn't go to the cafeteria because initially the cafeteria wasn't desegregated. It was the college, the university. And so I would eat in my room. And one night there came a knock on the door, and I went to the door, and there were these girls with bags of groceries. And some of the girls used to complain because I had a kitchenette and I had a bathtub and I had a shower and it was all private. None of them did. So they
said, I want to be Black.
That's right. Well, no, they didn't want to be They said they were being discriminated against. But anyway, these girls came in and they said, would you mind? We've come to cook dinner for you. And I have to say that while I knew a lot about race, I knew about Black and white. I did not know about Jews because in the South, it was Black people and white people.
Right.
And these girls came in, and throughout the evening, they began to introduce me to something that I had not known, and that was Jewish people. And the way they introduced it was to say, we are not going through what you're going through, but the history of our people is such that we can empathize with you. And they taught me that night about the Holocaust. And it was just an amazing time. And some of those girls have remained friends of mine all these years. But I learned things even as they were learning things. And it went back to that whole idea of faith, because they had faith that they could share with me their history and it would mean something to me. And it did, and it always has. And so there was so many. I remember one time I was sitting in my room. Nobody had spoken to me the whole day. I'd been to class, and I happened to look up. I was looking in the mirror because I think I had a computer. It might have been a typewriter back in those days.
A typewriter, Charlotte.
A typewriter. But I was looking at it, and I suddenly went, hey there. No one had spoken to me the entire day.
Oh my God.
And yet, throughout the time that I was there were teachers who befriended me. One, thanks to you, did a painting of me, asked me to sit for him, and I sat for him because I didn't have anything else to do. And that ended up, thanks to you, in the portrait gallery in Washington. But for a long time, it was in the dean's office, hung in the dean's office. And there were other professors who reached out in their own way. That particular professor invited me to his home to meet with his family. Other teachers who reached out. So, although it was an unusual situation, there were people who wrapped their arms around me one way or another. And then, speaking of Hamilton, I mean, if I used to have stomach pains, and now that I look back on, there might have been a little PTSD or something, but that's the latest iteration of that. But the one person who would always show up when I was in the school infirmary was Ham. He was amazing. And I was also not doing very well in biology. And one of the professors said, well, why don't you get Hamilton to, help you, because he's setting the curve in these biology classes. Up to that point, the curve before he got there was like 60 was the A. That is 98, 99. So we would get there and he would say, And he stuttered a little bit. He said, "Oh, okay, now like you got to get this, got to get this." And I said, "But Hamp, it's multiple choice, and there are always exceptions." He said, "Do you want to pass this course or not?" Okay, I'll think about it. But he was there for me, and I tried to be there for him. And as I said, there were other students who were awfully kind to me, and so I was never, although that day I hadn't spoken to anybody the entire day. There were often times when I had friends who surrounded me and were nice to me and were like any other student, treated me like any other student.
Did you cry when you opened the door and saw the girls with bags and they cooked for you?
No, I was just a little surprised, but I guess in those days, whatever came, I was ready for it. You know,
I find that very moving. You know, just very moving, like a scene out of a film. Now I'm going to ask you.
You want to make
it
into a film? I know you do films, so I could probably set that up for you.
All right, let's talk about that offline. It should be part of a film. And I have filmed your story before.
Yeah, you've been at UGA. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will do again. Now I'm going to ask you this next question, and then I'm going to stand up and walk over to the blinds of my kitchen because as you can see, the sun is on my face. I don't want the students to think I'm turning.
All right, I'll answer the question while you pull the blinds.
Professor Gates turned white halfway through the interview. You know, there's something curious I've never talked to you about. You moved from being a subject at the center of history, at the center of a very important historical event in the long march to civil rights, to a professional reporting on history as your career unfolded as a professional journalist. Do you think the two things are related? That, you know, you had to read all these things about you, some good, some bad, some accurate, some not. And then you could then gain control of the story by moving over on the other side of the newspaper, as it were, or of the typewriter. Do you think the two are related? And you answer, I'll be listening.
Okay. Well, you know, first of all, there was some good role models covering the desegregation of University of Georgia, one of whom was Calvin Trillin, who eventually wrote a book called An Education in Georgia, and UGA published it. And we did a discussion about it. And it was easy to spot the really good journalists who were covering the story. And I learned a lot from people like Trillin, who, you know, it's sometimes, I think, challenging for reporters to be, and I don't like the term objective. I like fair and balanced. And I think sometimes, even today, I'm watching television and I see journalists get so upset when they see people not telling the truth, and when it's very easy to pinpoint the lies that people are telling. That's part of our job. And I think that, you know, African-American Black journalists are often, and to be an African-American, to be a journalist, to be a woman, to have the experience I've had could be challenging, because, you know, you come out of an activist situation and yet there you are starting to actually report on people. But I think that has helped me be a better journalist, because like right now I'm working on a book, which is a collection of my pieces that I've written over the years, and tentatively it's called My People. And I attempted to cover people of color, and in those days it was mostly Black people, in ways that were recognizable to themselves, not as stereotypes, not as the first to do something, or not as a criminal who did something bad, but people in their own life, you know, how they live their lives. And, you know, there were times when I had to write things that were not totally pleasant about a Black person necessarily, but for the most part, I tried to balance that out. And I learned something. I learned from the people that I that I wrote about, that I reported on. For example, when I was Harlem bureau chief for the New York Times, I went to cover one of the first projects that the Black Panthers had launched in Harlem. And you know, the Black Panthers are now on television in this latest piece about their lives of Fred Hampton and
Fred Hampton.
Yeah.
Judas and the Messiah.
Yeah, and
the Black Messiah.
Yeah, and that's where history is. I'm so happy to see history coming back, even in you know, in this way, in fictional accounts that are based on fact. But you know, I went to cover the breakfast program, and the Panther said to me when he saw my credentials, he said, "Oh no, you can't come in here." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you work for the man," meaning the New York Times. I wanted to tell him, no, they call it the Gray Lady, but I didn't want to piss him off. So I said, well, what's that got to do with anything? He says, well, you know, the man never write anything right about us. And I said, well, have you ever seen anything I've written? He said, no. And I said, well, let's make a deal. You let me come in this time, and if what you see in the newspaper tomorrow is not an accurate account of what happened, don't let me come in next time. But let me come, give me a chance. And you know what he said?
What?
I have never forgotten this. And you can write this down. You can use it too.
Okay.
He said, all right, you can come in this time, but, and I held my breath. He said, but you got to come in right.
Oh, that's great.
Isn't that great?
That's great.
And so I think that those of us who come out of a particular environment and a particular background, but are also responsible for interpreting life for a broad public, not just our own people, but for a wider public, we have to come in right. And we have to try as best we can to be as honest as we can, and to be sure, journalists make mistakes. We're human. But that's why I don't like the term objective. But if you look at papers that have great responsibility and great, you know, are regarded in high esteem, they make mistakes, but they correct the mistakes. Every newspaper that has any soul to it at all will say, oh, in the story we did about so-and-so, we misspelled such and such, or we gave the wrong this. So, you know, I think that that's how you keep your profession professional. You're not your computer. That's why you're not objective. Your computer is objective. Mine tries to think for me sometimes. Spelling words for me and things like that. But no, I mean, you just, you go and you bring your own background, but then you try and realize and appreciate the fact that you are communicating with a broad range of people, and you're trying to educate them to the realities of life.
What keeps you up at night about the news business today? And let me frame this a little bit. 4 or 5 years ago, CNN, you could have called it Trump NN. You know, every night, 24 hours a day, the articles were about Donald Trump, even when he was running for, before he was elected, and then when he was elected. And I used to love CNN because I would learn what was happening in Bangladesh, what was happening in Johannesburg, what was happening in Mauritania, what was happening in the Middle East, all that stuff. And it was all about Donald Trump. And I remember reading an essay by Frederick Douglass. I think it's called Othello's Lost His, students, you could fact check it. Othello has lost something, meaning he had lost his message because he had spent all those years on the abolitionist circuit fighting against slavery. And then when they abolished slavery, he said, I ain't got nothing left to talk about, you know? Well, soon enough, white supremacy reared its ugly head. He had something to talk about. But I've noticed a little bit on the news that they still keep dragging, because there were people who made a living out of either defending or trashing Donald Trump. So tell me what's your take on the news industry today, And what worries you about it?
Well, I think that we are in a very challenging time. And that is not only because of the way in which our politics have been taking us, but we have COVID, the pandemic. And so there's so many things now that are unusual in our lifetime. I mean, there are things that when you read history, you know that some of this history is repeating itself. I mean, some of these things are not new. Every day I'm reading about something that happened years and years ago that is not that different from some of the things that are happening today. But I think that we have a whole new, we have different ways of communicating now. We have Twitter, we have just all kinds of things I won't even mention right now that are kind of disturbing. But I think that we're in a moment where we have to stand back just a little bit and look at ourselves and ask us, why are we here? What is our responsibility to our community? And I don't mean just our US community, but we've run this program at the Hutchins Center when we do that panel on the vineyard in the summer, and we talk about a single garment of destiny. And so I think that the current administration is beginning to look at the larger world and how we fit into it. But so much of it right now is difficult to analyze because there's so many different things happening simultaneously. But thankfully, there are these programs on Sunday. I'm wedded to them that analyze the news media. Media people are looking at their own productions and analyzing what they can do better. It's just one of those times where we're going to have to work really hard to figure out, again, how we produce news, as we used to say at the news hour, how we can produce news that the public can use. That's why we exist. To give them information to make good decisions about their lives. And so it's a challenging moment. And I would suspect that if you ask any number of journalists today, how challenging is your work? They're gonna, if they're honest about it, they'll say very challenging. Not only that, our local news, and COVID hasn't helped because with the funds drying up, so many of our local journal enterprises are not able to survive. And how are people in local communities going to get their information? They're not going to get it from Twitter. What's going on in their neighborhood. I mean, in Florida, in one of the cities in Florida, they just ended the mandate for masks.
Oh my God.
And I haven't seen a lot of coverage of that and helping people understand the importance of having those masks. And so I think that it's going to take a lot of work to figure out how we inform local communities about what's important and get them to appreciate the information that they're getting. It's a tough time.
Charlene, do you think, excuse me, do you think that freedom of speech is under siege today with political correctness and cancel culture? That, oh my God, you called me a Negro, you're fired. Or, you could think of 1,000 examples, even at the New York Times. The firing of Donald McNeil, very controversial, and other issues. Tell me about that. And let me say, one, our introductory course, African American Studies, which I used to teach with Larry Bobo before he became dean, great sociologist, was built around the debates that Black people have had from the 18th century on about what it means to be Black. There are 42 million Black Americans, and more Black Americans than all the people in Canada, and that's a fact. But people write about the Black community as if we all agree. We've been disagreeing, as you know, since the day we got off the first slave ship about how the hell to get out of here. And so what we want to do is to show the students, white students, Asian students, Indian students, Black students, that there never was one way of being Black. And that censorship is to justice. Censorship is to art, is lynching is to justice. You know, you have to let people speak. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think that's why it's so important for those of us who are in this business of journalism to help educate people with good information, news that they can use, because, you know, it's difficult when you hear ugly things to respond. But if you educate people, then they have the ability to respond themselves. And I don't have it in front of me now, but there was a column, it may even be in the Times today. I was reading, it may have been Frank Bruni's column, but it was about this. It was about cancel culture and stuff. And one of the things I find very informative these days, although it bothers me that people don't put their full names, they can write reactions to things with pseudonyms and whatever. I want to know who you are. If you if you feel strong enough to have a position, then use your name. But
right.
Anyway, I read the comments, and there were lots and lots of comments about the column that he wrote, and I encourage you to take a look at that, because what it said to me was that we need to help educate our people and have them understand what our Constitution guarantees, what our principles have established in terms of freedom of speech, and how we can deal with it in a way that is constructive. And you know, I was very nervous about this webinar today, because I was on one yesterday that never got off the ground because there was something interfering with it. And it took 45 minutes. And finally, the technician who was working on it called me on the phone and said that there's something called Zoom bombs.
Oh, yeah.
And there are trolls on the internet who, if they don't like what's going on, they can bomb you out. Yeah. Which they did to this program yesterday. So, you know, one of the things I've always appreciated about the PBS NewsHour, which sometimes can, you know, put you to sleep, but I work for it, and I'm happy to do my series on solutions to racism, because they're not, everybody's covering racial incidents, but this is the only place so far that has allowed me to focus on solutions, and there are solutions. And I think that people get frustrated and disappointed because they don't hear answers to difficult questions. One of the things that I've always liked about the NewsHour is something you said earlier. It looked at not just our United States world, but the entire world and how we fit into it. And while I think that for now, they tend to spend a little more time on the rest of the world than on our own world. I understand why they're doing it. It's part of that history. But the NewsHour's philosophy always was that we produce news that people can use to make good decisions about their lives. But it's not just about their lives, it's also about their community. And I think that as we move into this next phase of journalism, we really do need to think hard about our role and responsibility in these challenging times, and not play gotcha, because that's the other thing I'm seeing now, a lot of gotcha journalism.
Oh yeah.
You have the president open his mouth or talk a little too slow, and all of a sudden, you see, he's stupid. He's not smart. He's old. And that's not our role. Our role is to listen for the information and help to process it for the public. And I think that we can't allow ourselves to allow criticism of our work to inhibit us from doing the best we can to, again, provide news that the public can use to make good decisions about all of us.
I keep thinking about those young female students beating on your door with the bags of food, and then you learning about that there were people called Jews, not just in the King James Bible, but actually walking around in Athens.
Okay. And the Holocaust.
And the Holocaust, and that they actually had particular cuisines that they ate, food that they couldn't eat. You've lived in South Africa. I've been in your house that you used to live in South Africa, which was magnificent. You entertained me with a grand feast. And learning about, I remember when I went to college, when I went to Yale, learning about the world was so exciting to me. I never thought that because I wasn't English, I couldn't read Shakespeare, or because I wasn't Russian that I couldn't read Dostoevsky, or because I wasn't Chinese, I couldn't appreciate Chinese art or Japanese calligraphy or whatever it was. You know, the world was open to me and I was a citizen of the world. Do you think that people still believe that and approach the world in that open way as our generation did? And I'm not romanticizing this through the fog of sentimentality. We really did believe that. And B, if not, how can we change it?
Do we believe what?
If you believe that people are not open to learning about the history and the art and culture and philosophy and religions of people around the world, what can we do about that?
Well, I'm not sure that's 100% accurate.
Okay.
I think that there are, I mean, I hear some amazing statements from academics and from other people who come on these talk shows and talk about things that are going on in the rest of the world. If you are interested in knowing about the rest of the world, there are places to find out. Mm-hmm. And I just think that, you know, we have to figure out how we present it. Mm-hmm. And you know, like today, I was reading early this morning about a man, a Rwandan man, who was murdered in Cape Town. Now, my history tells me that there's something really weird about this, because this is the second or third Rwandan who's been murdered in South Africa with the reason given that it was a robbery or it was something other than a political murder. And I sent it to friends of mine in South Africa who are up on the news and up on the things that are going on there. And I just said, and then a question mark. Because I guess maybe part of it is because Ron and my husband and I spent 17 years in South Africa, during which time, as you said, you came and visited, but we really became a part of the community in so many ways, even though I was covering the community also. But again, to get to know the community, to get to report on the community, you got to get to know the community. And I knew I had covered Rwanda, and I know about some concerning things going on, but it's there in the Times, and I was glad to see it, and I just hope that it'll get followed up. And I think it's the responsibility of you know, that's what we're doing with giving voice to the voiceless at University of Georgia. Those young people have now, they're covering issues that relate to people of color, and that's not just Black people, it's Black people, but it's Latin people, it's women who are being, who have come from cultures outside of this country, but when they've been brought to this country, they've been treated in inferior ways, that the way they have been back home. But these young students are saying, wait a minute, you're in America now, this is not gonna happen here. We're gonna expose this. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm probably not answering your question, but
no, you are.
But yeah, we've just got to keep on keeping on and learning how to do our jobs as the best we can. That's what you're doing, Skip. I mean, that series on the Black church I have gotten, it's like I did it. And I'm taking people are writing me saying, wow, y'all did a good job. And I'm saying, oh, thank you very much. but it's that kind of history that doesn't just slap you in the face, but says, here's information that you need to know. And doing it in such a way, again, that you're not ramming it down somebody's throat, and yet you're giving them context for it. And I just think that we have to do that at the local level. We have to and figure out how we can support our local journalism, our journalism at UGA. Through giving voice to the voices. We've got some amazing work that's going on with these young people, and I'm just so thrilled that that I'm aware of it, and in some ways I'm a part of it and helping to enable it, because hopefully those young people won't stop there. They go on.
I'm on the board of directors of ProPublica.
Oh yeah.
And I was a founding member of that board after being on the Pulitzer Prize board for 9 years. Paul Steiger, who was one of the principals who helped to create ProPublica, asked me to move from when my term was up, the Pulitzer Prize board, to move over to that board. And we need more and more diverse voices in journalism, and particularly in investigative journalism, more people of color. So we hope the School of Journalism will send us candidates and diversify the voices in investigative journalism, because there are not that many. I see Alton's here. He's about to yank the chain. Can I ask him one more question, or are we out of time?
Yes, go for one more.
You're like the Grim Reaper, man, just like showing up out of nowhere. Saying, I ain't home. All right, Charlene. What was the most important news story that you ever covered? And that's part A. Part B, see, I'm cheating a little bit. And part B is, and what was the one that got away that you most regret not being able to interview or write about?
That is a tough question, because I wouldn't be the journalist I think I am if I didn't think that every story I covered was the most important story. Now, I don't know if you can see back in the background me over Nelson Mandela's shoulder, but that was certainly one that every journalist in the world wanted to be a part of. And when I learned about it from my producer, Jackie Farmer, my editor called and said, you heard the news? I said, yeah, and Jackie's made reservations for us tonight. And he says, well, we better talk to Jim first, but I think it's going to be okay. A few minutes later, the phone rang, and it was Les Crystal calling back saying, well, Jim says that he'll only approve it if you can guarantee an interview with Mandela. And I had no way of guaranteeing an interview with Mandela, but I said, well, if anybody can, I can. And sure enough,
right answer.
Because I had maintained communication with the anti-apartheid people over the years. And I had a feeling that I would be able to get it, but every journalist in the world was going down there. But that was a very important one, because of the way in which Americans had identified with the anti-apartheid struggle.
Yeah.
And also with the way people all over the world had identified with Mandela and his principles and the things that he stood for. Now, one that got away, none ever got away.
Did those Jewish girls teach you the word chutzpah?
Right, they did.
That's good. That was a good word to take away. Charlene, this has been marvelous. Thank you. I want everyone to know that one of the inspirations for me to produce the Black Church, our latest PBS series, was the fact that every Sunday between July the 1st and Labor Day, Charlene drags me to church on Sunday at the Union Chapel. I hate the fact that they start church at 10 o'clock. It is outside of my rhythm. I like it to be at 11 o'clock, and it's the summertime. Charlene's emailing me. She'll call my cell phone. And that church is packed by, if you don't get there by 9:15, you can forget it. You can't even get a parking place. So Charlene will hold the seat for me. And, I look around in that church and you'd see people like Vernon Jordan, and sometimes Spike Lee, or a lot. Yeah. And working class people, middle class people, upper middle class people. A lot of those people probably don't even believe in God, but they believe in the church. That I realized that the church was a culture. It was a way of being. It was a way our people persevered. It was a laboratory for the production of Black music and poetry, and it was always political. It was born in politics. Absalom Jones was yanked out of his pew because he was worshiping in the white section of St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. We've always had the ministers and religious people at the heart of the abolitionist movement, at the heart of Reconstruction, at the heart of the rollback, fight against the rollback of Reconstruction. And God knows, without the church, there would be no civil rights movement. It unfolded in the church, through the church, with the church. And it's that warm blanket of comfort that I get attending those services with you each week. A warm blanket on a cold and snowy day. That feeling is what I wanted to replicate and convey, even though we critique the church for its homophobia. We could critique the church for a long history of sexism. We critique the church for its failure to rise up to the crisis of HIV/AIDS. But it was really that experience we have each Sunday that made me think each week, maybe I should make a film about this. Maybe I should make a film about this. And I wanted to thank you publicly for that, my dear sister. And so you are welcome to share any credit that we get. And I love you very much. And the University of Georgia should be proud, and I know they are, to have you as its principal advocate. I mean, you would think, for all you listening, you would think the University of Georgia was Oxford and Cambridge and Bologna and the University of Paris, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton rolled into one. I said, I graduated from Yale and the University of Cambridge. She said, poor you. I graduated from the University of Georgia.
But I just want to thank you for doing this today, because I know what your schedule is like, and you're probably going to run out of there and film another Finding Your Roots. But I also just want to leave one thought with the University of Georgia community. We hear a lot these days about a younger generation and the new generation, and I'm all for it. And that's why Ron and I support Giving Voice to the Voiceless and BUGA and all of the organizations at the university. But I also want to say, remember, Skip, you said that you watched me when you were 9 or 10 years old.
9 years old, yeah.
And here we are working together on so many things. I really do think that one of our big jobs today is to keep this coalition of the generations going, because I think that older people have something to offer the younger generation, just as the energy that we're seeing in this younger generation inspires us older members of the generation. So I'm just so pleased that we've got students on this call, and that we can stay in touch one way or another. And hopefully one day we'll get down there together and be able to hug them all, as I would like to do.
I got my second dose. I got that shot on Saturday. Everybody get vaccinated. And I especially want the brown and black people listening to get over, for those who have any reluctance, you got to get over that. What's the choice, death or the vaccine? You got to get vaccinated.
All right. Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you all.
I love you. I love you.
Go
Thank
Dogs!
you, Alton. Alton, we're turning it over to you.
Yes. Yes. Professor Gates, thank you so much, and to you as well, our jewel, Charlene. So happy to hear you all in this conversation. It is, as you all just shared, both of you have a strong love for the Black church. Charlene as a preacher's kid, and Skip as a singer that would line a hymn and get the church rolling. And I think, as you all just said, you critique the church because you love the church. And we're so glad that you all took some of your time to share with us some of the work that y'all have been doing. This has truly been a treat for so many of us here in the UGA community. Professor Gates, I have an aunt, we call her Aunt Kat, and she truly loves your show, Finding Your Roots. And for a lot of us here at the University of Georgia and in the Bulldog Nation, we look to Charlene and Hamilton and Mary Frances as our roots at this institution. And we know we walk in their footsteps in all that we're able to do. And so we know that because of them, we can, we will, and we must continue to do the work that they teach us. It's been a good reminder, today's conversation, of something that Charlene tells us often, and it's that we stand on their shoulders to build our shoulders up for others. So Charlene, we thank you for your support and encouragement, along with Mary Frances Early and the Holmes family, as we continue to work to create a UGA that is better and stronger today than it was yesterday.
God bless you. God bless you, Alton.
Before we close, I also want to thank Jamani. Jamani, we're proud of all you're going to do as a graduate of the College of Engineering. I'm really looking forward to what comes after your May graduation. And in closing, I would finally say, please continue to join us for a number of the other events that we have planned to commemorate the 60th anniversary of desegregation here at the University of Georgia. You can view and learn more about those events on the 60th anniversary webpage. And so I encourage you to go and visit that website. Professor Gates, we cannot close without making one last Black church reference. And like Charlene, I too am AME. So as we would say before we would wrap up our meetings in the Young People's Department, if all hearts and minds are clear, this will conclude today's program. Everyone else, have a good day, and as always, go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.